This is WJTS in.form. I'm your host, Bill Potter, and it's time for our weekly visit with State Representative for District 63. That is Mark Messmer. Mark, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Bill. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, there is exciting things happening in the legislature, and let's devote, I guess, all of this we're going to devote to the budget.
Okay. Well,
that you had mentioned that it is now the final budget has been.
It's been passed and amended in the House. Monday will be the final vote on the amended version that we'll finish work on in our half of session.
Okay, and so then it goes to the Senate.
Goes to the Senate, to their Appropriations Committee, and goes through some more adjusting in their committee, and then it'll go to their Senate floor and go through some potential more amending, and then the amended version that they get done with goes to Conference Committee. So the last week and a half it's kind of like the Wild West show of legislative action, but we're nearing, we're nearing halftime.
Okay.
I mean, that's really, the game's not over, the job's not done on the budget, but we've had our opportunity to weigh in our priorities and got our finished product done with amending yesterday. We'll vote on the final passage of that on Monday, send it to the Senate, and then they'll start their work.
And even though we call it the final, it actually will come back to you again.
Oh yeah,
it's like the unfinal final.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So we're at the halfway point in session and the halfway point on the budget, which is really that's our constitutional duty that we're there to take care of. We'll get at the very last day of session, the House and the Senate will get the final version would be what they call the Conference Committee report. That the House and Senate negotiators hammer out the differences. So the last day of session, we'll get one more vote on the final tweaking. I don't expect there to be any drastic changes in the Senate. I mean, they'll look at some of the percentages of things that we've got, and they'll maybe want to prioritize things a little higher or lower. But it's typically small adjustments to the budget, that they add to it. And what they'll have the opportunity that we don't. The final revenue forecast will be given to the legislative body about the middle of April. They'll come up. They did one in December. That's kind of used to set the foundation for the budget that we start on. And then the April forecast will be what they will, because there might be tax credit programs. There might be additional funding to education, or there might be additional funding to other categories that maybe we would like to do, but we're limited to what the income data that we have to work with. We take what comes from the state budget committee, the nonpartisan group that provides that analysis. What they give us, we don't second guess. We don't say, well, we think you're wrong on this, and we're going to assume more. We take their number as the number, and then they'll give a new number. They'll update it for. Do we think the economy's picking up? Do we think the economy's slowing down? The Senate might be in the position where they can either, add to or take from what we've done with that April forecast. So.
Okay. Well, let's look at the semifinal budget
that is coming out of the House.
Sure. Yeah, it's going to happen next week. What are some good things that you think are coming out of this budget?
Well, overall, it's been probably one of the more pleasant budgets to be a part of, because my last 4 years. We've been through, into a recession, in the middle of a recession, and we've dealt with more likely where are we going to cut, not where are we going to increase. So it's been a little bit different this year, where we've actually said, okay, we've got reserves, and we're going to maintain those reserves. I mean, they might call it, if some people call it a surplus, I just call it, reserves. Would you have in your business or your home? You don't budget to spend, you try not to anyway, every penny that you have. You need, we need to be able to maintain a little bit of reserve, so when there is a downturn, we don't have to cut spending in departments immediately. We don't have to raise taxes. You always want to maintain a little surplus, and right now we're sitting at about a 10% surplus. It's probably a prudent area to be, and this budget is built on maintaining that reserve fund where it's at. It includes another $334 million in K through 12 spending, which is it'll be a 3% roughly overall increase over the biennium. 2% in year one and 1% in year two. I looked at the schools in my district. There's two that are projected to get less dollars per student. One, because I think they have an error in the data they gave the budget agency on their free and reduced lunch participation. Mm-hmm. So I need to make a call on that. And the second one is seeing a slight reduction per student, because in years past, the way they did some of the budgeting, they always had what they called hold harmless clauses in the budget. So you never got less than you got the year before. You might have had declining enrollment, but you never got less than you had the year before. So some schools got way out of whack on their cost per student that they were getting. And I've got one school in my district that we're halfway. There was a 9-year transition period started 4 years ago, so we're halfway into that, and their base cost per student is on within a couple more years. Every school corporation, every student, the base amount will be the same. That's a shocking concept. Every school corporation will get the same per student across the state. Well, in years past, when I started my first year, there was IPS schools and Gary schools that were getting $12,000 per student, where we were getting $5,000 in most of the schools in my district. Now that parity is getting narrowed down. One of my schools is still in that transition period where they're seeing some reduction per kid, because at one point they were a couple thousand above the median. But everybody else is getting at least some new money. I didn't look to see what the overall is, net new dollars, but at least there's no cuts. And I think the ones that had declining dollars per student, they know from where this trend started a few years ago. I think they were anticipating that. The one, I'm going to make sure they correct their free and reduced lunch count, because it's the only school that I've got that is showing a drop in that number. Probably something wrong with their data. But probably the most significant change in this budget that we're doing that has huge impacts for road funding at the state and local level, and one I'm probably most excited about, after we've kind of shored up education funding, we're going to make a large transition. There's a fuel excise tax, state tax, that's 18 cents a gallon that you pay every gallon. There's 18.5 federal, 18 state. And of that 18 cents, at some point, a decade or two ago, the state started taking a third of that money to pay state police and Bureau of Motor Vehicle expenses. And we're going to take all of that money from fuel excise tax, we're going to take the BMV and state police and pay for them out of the general fund, where they should have been all the time. And we're going to dedicate all of that excise tax money to road work. And that will be $140 million per year increase in road funding. That's pretty significant. We were spending about $280 million per year off the state excise tax before. This will put another $140 million on top of that. We're also going to take 20% of the sales tax that's collected from fuel and dedicate that to road funding, which will be another $110 million per year. So of our state allocation that we were collecting before from fuel excise of $280 million, we're now going to add another $250 million on top of that.
Almost double.
Almost double. And half of that is kept by the state, and half gets allocated to the counties and cities for county road work and paving projects in town. So it'll be a pretty significant increase, for everybody on road maintenance, bridge maintenance, which is sorely needed.
Will there be federal money tied to that
Absolutely.
Would help it even more?
Yeah, the benefit of every dollar we commit from the state side of the funding mechanism, there's normally a federal component that's matched on top of that. So it leverages more federal dollars. When we can commit more to it, then the federal match goes up as well.
And that 18 cents, by the way, as gas prices go up and down, that 18 cents has nothing to do with that. That just is a fixed number.
That stays there the same all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if we're moving the state police and the BMV to the general fund, how's that money being made up, or is it there?
Well,
or is
part of our, I guess, part of the economic turnaround and part of the increased revenue that that we're seeing over the last couple of years, to the state, is allowing us to to put that money and pay for it out. And I think we really wanted to do this switch probably 4 years ago. When there was talk about doing it then, but the budget was so tight already, and they were cutting everywhere you turned, that to transition, another $140 million, to the general fund when you were already looking at cutting everywhere else, just wasn't possible.
But now we can do that.
Now we can do that.
And to wrap things up, the governor, how does he feel about the budget? I know
Well,
there's been some
a little disappointed that at this point it doesn't have his tax cut, on income tax built into the budget at this point. It's not an issue that's off the table, but until we get the revised revenue forecast, we've done, I think, a pretty prudent job of allocating what we're looking at, the revenue that we have, knowing we had to make up for some pretty big, holes in K through 12 spending. We're also allocating another 3.5% to higher education funding, and out of that, a couple $100 million for for capital projects to the universities. We just had some big areas of catching up to do from the last 4 years of some really tight budgets. The highway funding issue had to be addressed. There's been a steady decline in fuel sales, more efficient vehicles. With the economy not being maybe quite where it was. All of those things have impacted the amount of gallons sold, which has had a steady reduction in that fuel, that fuel revenue. We had to do something. We're drastically, short of where we were on funding, just for basic maintenance. So we had to make that shift. When the new revenue forecast comes out in April, if there's increased dollars to work with, and our leadership in the House and the Senate leadership and the governor have talked, it's by no means off the table, but we really couldn't. It's about his proposal that he's got is about $500 million per year impact on the budget. So it's about $1 billion potential that, will some of that roll back into the economy and cause increased growth and maybe some potential revenue. You may not see a full net 10% reduction because some of it'll roll back in, but it's still it's potential reduced revenue that we really can't build into it until we see the April forecast. And if the money's there, by all means we'll consider it. And he understands that now. I think he was just a little disappointed that we didn't structure the budget going in with that, but there just wasn't that much additional revenue at this point to work with.
All right, well, Mark, thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome.
It's always enjoyable to have you here. Our guest has been District 63 State Representative Mark Messmer. Thank you for watching WJTS in.form. We are local people watching local people.